The detective had seen a lot in 23 years, but this case made no sense. The victim wasn't robbed. She wasn't threatened. She wasn't in danger from anyone. At least not anyone she knew about. She was a woman who had finally gotten her life together after years of suffering in silence. She had lost everything once. She had rebuilt from nothing. She was 3 months away from marrying the love of her life. And then someone walked up to her front door at 7:41 in the morning and tried to melt her face and erase it from existence. No witnesses saw it coming. No evidence explained why. But when detectives asked one simple question, the answer revealed a truth more terrifying than the crime itself. What had she done to deserve this? She had dared to be happy.
Hi, Barry. We're north of the alleyway. Please reverse rate. Mark mercy inside.
To understand what was taken from Denise Williams on that October morning, you have to understand who she was before the world reduced her to a number on a scale, a victim in a headline, a cautionary tale about trusting the wrong man. Because Denise Williams wasn't born broken. She wasn't born a victim. She was born into love, into purpose, into a family that believed in building others up rather than tearing them down. And everything that happened to her, every pound gained, every tear shed, every scar she would eventually carry, was a consequence of choices made by a man who saw her light and decided to extinguish it. Denise Marie Williams came into this world on March 3, 1976, in Richmond, Virginia, the only child of Robert and Gloria Williams. Robert had worked for the United States Postal Service for 34 years by the time he retired, a man who believed that showing up every day, doing your job with integrity, and providing for your family was the highest calling a man could answer. Gloria taught 3rd grade at Chimborazo Elementary School in the Church Hill District, a historically black neighborhood in Richmond where everybody knew everybody, where Sunday dinners followed church service without question, and where children were raised by the entire block, not just their parents. The Williams family wasn't wealthy, but they were rich in the ways that mattered. Rich in faith, rich in community, rich in the kind of love that shows up consistently rather than dramatically. Gloria instilled something in Denise from the very beginning, a phrase she repeated so often it became the soundtrack of Denise's childhood. She would say, "Baby girl, you're blessed, so you can be a blessing to others. Everything God gives you isn't meant to stay with you. It's meant to flow through you." That philosophy would shape every major decision Denise made for the next 3 decades. It would lead her to volunteer at homeless shelters every Thanksgiving, starting at age 12. It would lead her to organize donation drives at her high school. It would lead her to choose a career in social work when she could have chased money in business or prestige in law. And ironically, that same generous spirit, that instinct to pour herself out for others, would make her vulnerable to a man who would take everything she had to give and leave her with nothing. In high school, Denise was the kind of person everyone remembered. She played volleyball, ran track, and joined the swim team. Not because she was trying to collect accolades, but because she genuinely loved moving her body, loved the camaraderie of team sports, loved pushing herself past what she thought was possible. At graduation in 1994, her classmates at John Marshall High School voted her most likely to change the world. She weighed 145 pounds, stood 5 feet 7 inches tall, and had the kind of smile that made strangers feel like old friends. She had no idea that within 15 years she would weigh over 500 pounds and pray every night for death. That future was unimaginable to the bright-eyed 18-year-old who walked across that graduation stage believing that hard work and a good heart were enough to protect you from the cruelty of the world. Denise enrolled at Virginia Commonwealth University that fall, majoring in social work, because she wanted to help children who didn't have what she had: stability, love, parents who showed up. She excelled academically, but more importantly, she excelled at connecting with people. Professors noticed her gift for making struggling students feel heard. Classmates gravitated toward her warmth. She was the one who organized study groups, who brought snacks to late-night cramming sessions, who remembered birthdays and checked in when someone missed class. When she graduated in 1998 with her Bachelor of Social Work, She had already been accepted into a position with Mecklenburg County Social Services in Charlotte, North Carolina. She packed her Honda Civic, hugged her parents goodbye, and drove 6 hours south to start her life. She was 22 years old, full of hope, full of plans, full of the naive belief that the world rewarded good intentions. In Charlotte, Denise became exactly who she was always meant to be. She worked with at-risk youth, specializing in foster care cases, spending her days advocating for children who had been failed by every adult in their lives. She started a mentorship program for teenage girls in the system, meeting with them weekly, helping them navigate school, relationships, and the trauma of feeling unwanted. On weekends, she volunteered at homeless shelters, serving meals, sorting donations, listening to people who just needed someone to see them. Her dream was to one day open her own youth counseling center, a safe space for teenagers who were falling through the cracks. Her friends described her as the person who remembered your birthday, your kids' names, your favorite restaurant. She was the one who organized baby showers, brought casseroles when someone was sick, showed up at funerals and weddings and everything in between. She was the kind of person who made you feel like you mattered simply by the way she looked at you. At 26, Denise ran her first 5K. She went salsa dancing every Friday night with her girlfriends. She dated casually but hadn't found anyone serious. She was too focused on building her career, on saving the world one child at a time. Photos from that era show a woman with bright eyes, confident posture, and a smile that seemed incapable of dimming. She had no idea that somewhere across the city, a man was building a reputation for charm and success while hiding something far more dangerous beneath the surface. And in August of 2004, at a networking event for black business leaders, Denise Williams would shake his hand for the first time. Before you continue with this story, take a moment to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear it, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about love and trust. Every monster has an origin story, but not every origin story creates a monster. Some men choose darkness because it serves them. Some men are drawn to it because they've convinced themselves they deserve whatever they take. And some men become something unrecognizable so gradually that even they don't see what they've become until they're standing over the ruins of someone else's life, convinced they're the victim. Darren Mitchell was all three of these men wrapped into one, and the world wouldn't understand that until it was far too late for Denise Williams to escape him. Darren Anthony Mitchell was born on November 15, 1974, in Columbia, South Carolina, the older of two boys raised by a single mother named Patricia Mitchell. His father, Raymond, left when Darren was 7 years old, walked out one morning for cigarettes and never came back. No goodbye, no explanation, no forwarding address. Patricia was left with two children, a mortgage she couldn't afford, and a heart so broken she never fully recovered. She worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat: days in the cafeteria at Richland Memorial Hospital, nights cleaning offices downtown. Darren became the man of the house by default at an age when he should have been playing Little League and watching cartoons. He made dinner for his younger brother David. He helped with homework. He learned to forge his mother's signature on permission slips because she was never home to sign them. On paper, this made him responsible, mature beyond his years. In reality, it planted something else entirely. A belief that the world owed him for what had been taken, and that control was the only way to ensure no one could ever leave him again. Teachers noticed something about Darren early on. His elementary school reports contained observations that would later read like prophecy. One teacher wrote in 1983, "Darren is intelligent, but struggles with empathy. He becomes visibly angry when he doesn't receive recognition for his work." Another noted in 1985, "Darren has difficulty accepting criticism and responds with hostility when corrected. He seems to believe rules apply to others, but not to himself." These were warning signs that went unheeded, written off as the natural consequences of a difficult home life. Nobody connected the dots. Nobody saw the pattern forming. And so Darren Mitchell grew up believing he was special, that his pain entitled him to whatever he wanted, that other people existed primarily to serve his needs. In high school, Darren transformed himself into exactly what Columbia, South Carolina expected, from a promising young black man. He was charming, athletic, popular, the starting point guard on the basketball team, homecoming king his senior year, the kind of kid that made adults say things like, "That boy is going places." He had a smile that made people trust him, and a handshake that sealed deals. But beneath that polish lived something colder. His first girlfriend, a sophomore named Tamika, later told friends that Darren monitored her phone constantly, questioned every male friend she had, and threw a desk across a classroom when he saw her talking to another boy. They broke up after 6 months, and Darren responded by spreading rumors about her that were so vicious she transferred to a different school. Nobody held him accountable. Nobody saw it as a pattern. "Boys will be boys," people said. "He's just protective because he really loves her," they rationalized. Darren attended the University of South Carolina on a partial basketball scholarship, his mother's prayers seemingly answered. But a knee injury his sophomore year ended his athletic dreams permanently, and something in Darren shifted. He pivoted to business, threw himself into finance courses, graduated in 1997 with a degree that would open doors his athletic career no longer could. He moved to Charlotte in 1999, took an entry-level position at a regional bank, and began climbing. By 2002, he was a loan officer. By 2006, he had been promoted to branch manager. By 2010, he held the title of regional director. On paper, Darren Mitchell was the American dream incarnate, a black man from a broken home who had pulled himself up, who had succeeded against the odds, who owned a home and went to church and shook hands with the right people at the right events. In reality, he was a man who measured his worth by what he controlled and who could not tolerate being rejected, overlooked, or outshone by anyone. The women who dated Darren before Denise could have warned her, but they never got the chance. A woman named Candace dated him briefly in 2001 and described the experience to friends years later. She said, "He was wonderful until I disagreed with him about anything. Then it was like talking to a completely different person. His eyes would go flat, like there was nothing behind them." She ended things after 2 months, and Darren showed up at her workplace uninvited 7 times before she threatened to call the police. Another woman, Cheryl, dated him in 2003 and eventually moved to Atlanta specifically to get away from him. She filed a police report after he slashed her tires, but charges were never pressed. There wasn't enough evidence, the officer said. Neither Candace nor Cheryl knew about each other. Neither woman knew about the woman who would come after them. And neither woman could have imagined that Darren Mitchell's pattern of control and punishment would eventually escalate to something no one could have predicted. By August of 2004, Darren was 29 years old, successful, and searching for a particular kind of woman. Someone kind enough to be manipulated, generous enough to give endlessly, and trusting enough to believe the mask he wore was his real face. And then he walked into a networking event for black business leaders and saw Denise Williams laughing across the room, her warmth drawing people to her like moths to light. And he knew he had found exactly what he was looking for. The evening of August 14th, 2004, changed 2 lives forever, though only one of them understood what was really happening. The networking event was held at the Westin Hotel in downtown Charlotte, a gathering of black professionals designed to foster connections, mentorship, and community. Denise had been invited by a colleague who thought she needed to get out more, meet people outside her social work circles, maybe even find someone worth dating. Denise agreed reluctantly. She was 28 years old and had spent so much time pouring into others that she rarely made time for herself. She wore a green dress her mother had helped her pick out and gold earrings she'd bought herself as a graduation present 6 years earlier. She had no idea she was about to meet the man who would spend the next decade dismantling everything she was. Darren was one of the featured speakers that evening, delivering a 15-minute presentation on building wealth in your community that had the audience nodding along and applauding at all the right moments. He was polished, articulate, confident without being arrogant. At least that's how it appeared. Denise watched from her seat near the back, impressed by his command of the room, his ability to make complex financial concepts accessible. When the event shifted to networking, she found herself at the refreshment table when a voice appeared beside her. "Those are beautiful earrings," Darren said, his smile wide and warm. "They match your energy." Denise laughed. It was a cheesy line, and they both knew it. But there was something disarming about the way he delivered it. Something that made her feel seen rather than targeted. She had no way of knowing that this was Darren's greatest skill, making women feel special right before he began the process of making them feel worthless. They talked for 2 hours that night. Darren asked about her work, listened intently as she described her foster care advocacy, asked follow-up questions that demonstrated genuine interest. He told her about his own childhood, about his absent father and hard-working mother, about the determination that had carried him from Columbia to Charlotte. He was vulnerable in ways that felt authentic, sharing just enough pain to create connection without overwhelming her. By the time the event ended, Denise had given him her phone number, and Darren had filed away every piece of information she'd shared, cataloging her values, her insecurities, her dreams, ammunition he would use against her in the years to come. The first date came 3 days later, at an upscale restaurant in the South End, where flowers waited at the table when she arrived. The second date, he was already talking about a future together, about how rare it was to find a woman with her combination of beauty and substance. By the third date, he had introduced her to his mother, Patricia, who embraced Denise like a daughter and told her later, "My son has never brought anyone home before. You must be special." Denise was overwhelmed by the speed of it all, but she interpreted that speed as certainty rather than strategy. She had never been pursued like this. She had never felt so wanted. Her friends were impressed. Darren was handsome, successful, attentive. "He's a catch, girl," her best friend Tanya told her. "Don't mess this up." Her mother, Gloria, however, saw something else. During a phone call in September, Gloria said carefully, "That man moves fast, baby. Why is he in such a rush?" Denise dismissed the concern. "He just knows what he wants, Mama. That's a good thing." The warning signs appeared within weeks, but Denise explained each one away because she wanted to believe in the fairy tale she was being sold. In month 2, Darren criticized a male coworker who had texted Denise about a work matter at 9 p.m. "Why is he texting you this late?" Darren demanded, his tone sharp. "That's inappropriate." Denise apologized, promised to set better boundaries. In month 3, Darren suggested she stop going to salsa dancing on Friday nights. "I don't like other men looking at you that way," he said. "You're not single anymore." She stopped going. In month 4, he commented on a dress she wore to a dinner party. "That's too tight," he told her in the car. "You're representing both of us now." She changed before they went inside. Each concession felt small, reasonable even, compromises that people in relationships make. She didn't realize she was being trained, conditioned, prepared for the isolation that was coming. On Valentine's Day, 2005, 6 months after their first conversation, Darren proposed at a crowded restaurant in front of 30 strangers. He had planned every detail: the ring, the flowers, the photographer he'd hired to capture the moment. Denise said yes with tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the romance of it all. The crowd applauded. The photos went up on social media. Her friends cried happy tears. Her mother did not. Gloria had seen something in Darren's eyes that Denise couldn't see yet. A coldness that appeared when things didn't go exactly his way. A possessiveness that masqueraded as devotion. But Denise was in love, or at least in love with who Darren pretended to be, and nothing her mother said could change that. Now, I have a quick question for you. Where are you watching this story from tonight? Drop your location in the comments below. Let me know where in the world you are. And if you've made it to this point, drop a comment that says, "I'm still here." Let's see who's really paying attention, because what comes next is going to test everything Denise believed about love. June 18th, 2005, was supposed to be the happiest day of Denise Williams's life. The ceremony took place at First Baptist Church in Charlotte, a historic black congregation, where 200 guests gathered to witness what everyone believed was a love story for the ages. Denise's parents had spent their savings to give their only daughter the wedding of her dreams. The flowers, the catering, the string quartet that played as she walked down the aisle in a dress she'd found at a boutique in Richmond during a special trip with her mother. Gloria Williams smiled through the ceremony, but her eyes held something Denise was too happy to notice. Robert Williams walked his daughter down the aisle with tears on his cheeks, praying silently that his instincts about his new son-in-law were wrong. The photos from that day show a beautiful couple, a joyful celebration, the beginning of forever. They don't show the argument that happened the night before, when Darren demanded that 3 of Denise's male friends be removed from the guest list because he didn't like the way they'd looked at her at the engagement party. The honeymoon took place in Jamaica, 7 days at a resort in Montego Bay that Darren had selected and booked without consulting Denise. She didn't mind. She interpreted his decisiveness as leadership, his control as care. On the second night, while she was in the shower, Darren went through her phone. He found nothing incriminating, but when she emerged, he asked questions about text messages from months earlier, about conversations with male colleagues, about Instagram comments she'd forgotten existed. Denise felt confused, off balance, but she answered every question honestly, apologizing for things that didn't require apology. This would become the rhythm of her marriage. Constant interrogation disguised as concern, perpetual surveillance framed as love. She didn't tell anyone about those moments. She was embarrassed, uncertain whether what was happening was normal or not. Surely all marriages had adjustment periods, she told herself. Surely this would get better once they settled into their new life together. They returned to Charlotte and moved into a 4-bedroom house in a new subdivision, a home selected by Darren in a neighborhood he believed reflected his status. The extra bedrooms were for the children they planned to have. 2, maybe 3, Darren said, enough to fill the house with noise and legacy. Denise continued her work at Mecklenburg County Social Services, still passionate about her foster care advocacy, still volunteering at shelters on weekends. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the boundaries of her life began to shrink. Darren requested that she text him when she arrived at work, when she left for lunch, when she was heading home. He called it checking in. She called it thoughtful. He suggested she reduce her volunteer hours because married women should focus on their homes and their husbands. She called it prioritizing. He called it reasonable. He questioned her friendships with single women, suggesting they might encourage her to behave inappropriately. She saw them less often. She told herself she was too busy, too tired, too focused on her new marriage to maintain all those relationships anyway. By 2006, Denise was seeing her parents once a month instead of every week. When Gloria and Robert came for dinner, Darren dominated every conversation, interrupting Denise mid-sentence, correcting her stories, speaking for her as if she were incapable of expressing her own thoughts. Robert noticed. After one such dinner, he told Gloria in the car, "That man doesn't let her finish a single sentence. Something's not right." But when Gloria raised concerns with Denise, her daughter defended her husband reflexively. "He's just passionate, Mama. He doesn't mean anything by it." Gloria stopped calling as often after that. It was too painful to hear her daughter making excuses for someone who was slowly erasing her. The verbal abuse began subtly, disguised as observation rather than attack. Darren would comment on her weight with an expression of concern rather than cruelty. "You're putting on a few pounds, baby. You should watch that." He would critique her cooking with disappointment rather than anger. "This isn't how my mother makes it. Maybe you should practice more." He would assess her appearance before they left the house, suggesting different outfits, different makeup, different versions of herself that better match the wife he wanted to present to the world. "You looked better when we met," he told her one evening, his voice flat. "What happened?" Denise started skipping meals. She started exercising obsessively. She started looking in mirrors with the critical eye he had trained her to use. She started believing him when he said she was lucky to have him, that other men wouldn't put up with her imperfections, that she should be grateful he stayed, despite her flaws. By the end of their first year of marriage, Denise Williams had lost herself so completely that she couldn't remember who she'd been before Darren Mitchell taught her she was worthless. The woman who had once been voted most likely to change the world was now a woman who apologized for existing, who walked on eggshells in her own home, who had forgotten what it felt like to be loved without conditions. And the worst part was yet to come, because Denise still believed that if she could just give Darren the one thing he wanted most, a child, an heir, a legacy, everything would get better. In 2006, Denise and Darren began trying to conceive, and what should have been a season of hope became instead the beginning of Denise's destruction. For Denise, motherhood had always been a dream. She had spent her career advocating for children who needed families, and she longed to create one of her own. For Darren, children represented something different: status, legacy, proof of his virility and success. A man like him deserved heirs. A man like him should have a family that looked perfect in photographs. When month after month passed without a positive pregnancy test, Darren's impatience grew into something uglier. "What's wrong with you?" he asked after 6 months of trying. "Why isn't this happening?" He refused to consider that the problem might be shared, might require mutual examination. In his mind, failure was always someone else's fault. And in this marriage, that someone was always Denise. Denise saw a fertility specialist in early 2007, submitting to invasive tests and uncomfortable procedures with the desperate hope that answers would lead to solutions. The diagnosis was polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS, a hormonal condition that made conception difficult but not impossible. She brought this news to Darren with cautious optimism, explaining what the doctor had said, outlining the treatment options available. Darren's response shattered something inside her. "So there is something wrong with you," he said, his voice cold. "I knew it." He refused to get tested himself for months, insisting the problem was hers alone to solve. When he finally submitted to examination and his results came back normal, he wielded that information like a weapon. "See? It's your body, your problem to fix." The first IVF cycle began in the fall of 2007, a process that cost $15,000 out of pocket and required Denise to inject herself with hormones daily, transforming her body in pursuit of the pregnancy she desperately wanted. The side effects were brutal: bloating, mood swings, weight gain that she couldn't control no matter how carefully she ate. Darren watched her body change with visible disgust, commenting on every pound, criticizing every meal, making her feel like a failure, even as she was sacrificing her health for their shared dream. The first cycle failed. The pregnancy test came back negative. Denise wept for days while Darren calculated what they'd spent, and reminded her that his money had been wasted on her inadequate body. The second IVF cycle came in 2008, and this time, against all odds, it worked. Denise was pregnant. She stared at the positive test in disbelief, then called Darren at work to share the news. For a brief moment, he seemed genuinely happy. For a brief moment, she remembered why she had married him. But the joy lasted only 8 weeks before cramping woke her in the middle of the night, before blood soaked through the sheets, before she realized she was losing the baby she had fought so hard to conceive. She begged Darren to take her to the hospital, but he told her it was probably nothing, that she was overreacting, that she should wait until morning. She drove herself to the emergency room at 3 a.m. while he went back to sleep. The doctors performed a D&C procedure, removing what remained of the pregnancy that had ended before it truly began. Darren didn't take a single day off work to be with her. He didn't hold her while she cried. He simply said, "We'll try again," as if she were a machine that had malfunctioned rather than a woman whose heart had been broken. The third IVF cycle brought another pregnancy in 2009, and this time Denise made it past the terrifying first trimester. At 12 weeks, she allowed herself to feel hope. She told her mother. She started buying baby clothes in secret, tiny outfits she hid in a drawer, because she was afraid to believe this was real. At 14 weeks, the bleeding started again. This time the miscarriage required emergency surgery. She lost so much blood that doctors administered a transfusion to save her life. She spent 4 days in the hospital recovering, and Darren visited twice, briefly, impatiently, anxious to get back to his own life. When she finally came home, weak and devastated, he looked at her and said, "Maybe this is God's way of saying, you're not meant to be a mother." She wanted to leave him then. She thought about it for weeks, played out scenarios in her mind, imagined a life free from his cruelty. But she was broken, physically and emotionally, and she couldn't imagine who would want her now. Damaged goods, a woman who couldn't even carry a baby to term. She stayed. Between 2007 and 2010, Denise endured 4 IVF cycles. The hormones ravaged her body, causing weight gain that no amount of dieting could reverse. By 2010, she weighed 210 pounds, still healthy by any objective standard, but unacceptable to a man who had married a size 6 and expected her to remain that way forever. Darren's cruelty intensified with every pound she gained. "You're disgusting," he told her. "I didn't marry a fat woman." He stopped touching her. He moved to a separate bedroom. He told friends and family that his wife had let herself go, never mentioning the fertility treatments, the miscarriages, the grief that was eating her alive from the inside. The 4th and final IVF cycle failed in the spring of 2010, and with it, the last of Denise's hope. She had emptied their savings account. She had destroyed her body. She had sacrificed everything. And Darren made sure she knew exactly whose fault all of it was. If you're finding value in this story, take a moment to like this video and share it with someone you love. Share it with your sisters, your daughters, your friends. Because the signs were there from the beginning, and sometimes the people closest to us need to hear these warnings before it's too late. The years following the final failed IVF cycle were the darkest of Denise Williams's life, a descent into despair that would strip away everything she had once been. By 2011, Denise weighed 320 pounds, and the number on the scale was only the most visible measure of her deterioration. She had withdrawn from social activities entirely, no longer volunteering at shelters, no longer mentoring the teenage girls who had once given her life purpose. Her parents barely recognized her when they visited, not just her physical appearance, but her spirit, which seemed to have dimmed to almost nothing. She no longer fought back when Darren criticized her. She no longer defended herself when he called her names. She had simply stopped hoping that anything would ever get better, and in that hopelessness, she found a strange, terrible peace. Darren treated his wife with open contempt by this point, no longer bothering to disguise his disgust behind concern or correction. He slept in a separate bedroom. He ate dinner alone in front of the television while she ate in the kitchen. He spoke to her only when necessary, and when he did speak, his words were designed to wound. But Darren Mitchell was not a man who could live without an audience for his charm, without a woman to reflect back the image he had of himself as successful, desirable, worthy of admiration. So in the spring of 2011, while his wife was home alone eating to fill the emptiness inside her, Darren began an affair with Victoria Hayes, a 28-year-old loan officer at his bank. Victoria was thin, ambitious, impressed by his title and his confidence. She had no idea that the successful man taking her to expensive restaurants was the same man who went home and told his wife she was too disgusting to touch. Denise discovered the affair in November 2011, finding a receipt in Darren's jacket pocket for a romantic dinner at the same restaurant where they'd celebrated their 3rd anniversary. 2 entrees, a bottle of champagne, the kind of meal he hadn't shared with her in years. She confronted him that evening, her voice shaking, asking for an explanation she already knew. Darren didn't bother denying it. "You think I want to come home to you," he said, looking at her with undisguised revulsion. "Look at yourself. You're not the woman I married. You're not even a woman anymore." Denise begged him to go to marriage counseling, to try to repair what had broken between them. He laughed at her. "There's nothing to repair," he said. "You're the one who broke this. You and your body and your inability to give me what I needed." He filed for divorce in January 2012, citing irreconcilable differences, telling friends and family that he had tried his best but couldn't stay, married to someone who refused to take care of herself. The divorce was finalized in August 2012 after 7 months of legal proceedings that drained whatever emotional reserves Denise had left. She received the house, which was underwater on its mortgage, and no alimony, because Darren's attorney argued convincingly that she was capable of working and hadn't contributed meaningfully to his career success. The court documents described the dissolution of the marriage in cold, clinical terms that captured none of the cruelty that had defined those 7 years. Darren walked away with his reputation intact, the sympathetic ex-husband who had been burdened with an ungrateful wife. Denise walked away with nothing but shame, grief, and a body she could no longer recognize as her own. She was 36 years old. She weighed 380 pounds. And she was absolutely, completely convinced that she deserved every bit of suffering that had been inflicted upon her. Darren wasted no time building the life Denise had failed to give him. He married Victoria Hayes in June 2013, a wedding at a country club that several of Denise's former friends attended, reporting back details that felt like knives in her heart. In 2014, Victoria gave birth to a daughter, the child Denise had lost 3 times, the child Darren had told her she wasn't meant to have. He posted family photos on social media, Darren and Victoria on vacation, Darren and his daughter at her first birthday party, Darren living the life he deserved with the wife who had earned it. Denise saw those photos. She couldn't stop looking at them, torturing herself with images of the happiness she believed she had failed to deserve. The weight climbed past 400 pounds, then 450, then 500. By March 2015, Denise Williams weighed 518 pounds and had become a prisoner in her own home. She could barely walk to the mailbox. She hadn't seen her father in over 6 months because she couldn't fit into his car. Her mother Gloria visited weekly, cooking meals, cleaning the house, trying desperately to keep her daughter alive while watching her disappear behind walls of flesh that had become both protection and prison. Denise had lost her job at social services, too many absences, too many physical limitations, and now worked from home doing medical billing, a job that paid less and meant even less. She ate constantly, not because she was hungry, but because food was the only thing that numbed the pain, the only comfort that didn't require her to look in a mirror or remember what she had lost. The lowest moment came on March 17, 2015. Denise was walking from her bedroom to the bathroom when she lost her balance and fell. The floor was cold beneath her, the ceiling unfamiliar from this angle, and no matter how hard she tried, she could not get up. Her arms wouldn't support her weight, her legs wouldn't cooperate. She lay there for 3 hours, crying, praying, waiting for someone to find her. When Gloria arrived for their scheduled visit and discovered her daughter on that bathroom floor, the paramedics had to remove the doorframe to get Denise out. At the hospital, while doctors checked her vitals and nurses avoided her eyes, Denise told her mother the truth she had been hiding for years. "I want to die, Mama. I just want to die." And Gloria Williams, holding her daughter's hand in that sterile hospital room, made a decision that would change everything. Not every hero wears a cape or carries a badge. Some heroes wear basketball shorts and carry clipboards. Some show up at 6 in the morning to a gym where a woman is too terrified to look anyone in the eye. Some heroes don't save lives all at once with dramatic interventions. They save them slowly, steadily, 1 rep at a time, 1 mile at a time, 1 conversation at a time. James Carter was this kind of hero, and his entrance into Denise Williams's life would prove that transformation is possible, even when you've given up on ever feeling human again. In the days following Denise's collapse, Gloria Williams made phone calls to every medical professional she could find, searching for someone who could help her daughter before it was too late. A doctor at Carolina's Medical Center referred Denise to a specialized weight loss program that combined nutritional counseling, physical therapy, and personal training. A comprehensive approach designed for patients who had reached crisis points. The program was expensive, but Gloria and Robert Williams emptied their retirement savings without hesitation. "We can't take that money with us when we die," Robert told his wife, "but we can use it to keep our daughter alive." Denise was assigned to work with a trainer named James Carter, And in April 2015, still recovering from her bathroom floor collapse, she walked into a gym at 6 in the morning to meet a stranger who would become one of the most important people in her life. James Carter was 38 years old, a former Army sergeant who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before returning home to a country that didn't know how to help veterans who had seen too much. He struggled with PTSD for years, lost his marriage, lost custody of his children, lost everything that had once made his life meaningful. He found salvation in fitness, not the superficial kind that's about appearance, but the deeper kind that's about proving to yourself that you're still capable of growth, of change, of survival. After getting certified as a personal trainer, James dedicated his career to working with clients that other trainers wouldn't touch. People who weighed 400 pounds, 500 pounds. People who had been told their entire lives that transformation was impossible. He had helped dozens of people lose over 200 pounds. But he had never worked with anyone quite like Denise Williams. She arrived at that first session wearing oversized sweatpants and a hoodie that covered as much of her body as possible. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor. Her shoulders curved inward as if she were trying to make herself smaller, which was impossible at 518 pounds, but she tried anyway. James didn't react to her size. He didn't show pity or disgust or any of the emotions she had learned to expect from people who saw her. He simply extended his hand, looked her directly in the eye, and said, "I'm James. I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. But I'm going to be here every single day. You will not do this alone." Denise started crying. She couldn't help it. No one had spoken to her with that kind of straightforward compassion in years. James handed her a tissue and said, "Good. Now let's get to work." The first workout was humbling in ways Denise hadn't anticipated. She couldn't walk on a treadmill. She could barely stand for more than a few minutes at a time. Her mobility had deteriorated to the point where basic movements required Herculean effort. But James had prepared for this. He started her with seated arm exercises, simple movements that she could do from a chair for 10 minutes without collapsing. When that became manageable, he added water aerobics, gentle stretching, exercises designed to build strength without destroying her joints. He modified everything, created programs specifically for her limitations, treated her body not as an embarrassment, but as a starting point. And every single morning, he showed up at 6 a.m., even when she canceled, even when she didn't appear. He would call her and say, "I'm here. I'll wait." Eventually, she started showing up consistently. Not because she believed she could change, but because she couldn't bear to disappoint the first person who had believed in her in longer than she could remember. James didn't just train her body. He confronted her mind, asked questions about her story, listened without judgment as she described the marriage, the miscarriages, the abuse, the collapse. He was the first person outside her family to hear the full truth, and his response changed something fundamental in her self-perception. "The man who did that to you was wrong," James told her after she finished. "Everything he said about you was a lie. You're not worthless. You're not broken. You're someone who got knocked down by life and needs help getting back up. That's not weakness. That's being human." Denise wasn't sure she believed him. The voice of Darren Mitchell was still louder in her head than any other. But James said something she would never forget. "That's okay. I'll believe it for you until you can believe it yourself." By the end of 2015, Denise Williams had lost nearly 100 pounds. She could walk on a treadmill for 5 minutes without stopping. She could look in a mirror without flinching. But the transformation was just beginning. Over the next 2 years, she would shed more than weight. She would shed the woman who believed she deserved to be treated like garbage. And somewhere across town, her ex-husband would watch this resurrection unfold and begin to feel something more dangerous than jealousy. Thank you so much for your incredible support of this channel. You're the reason these stories get told, the reason these voices get heard. If you want to help us keep creating content like this, consider joining our YouTube membership today to unlock exclusive perks, access to premium content, and be part of a community that believes in the power of these stories. Your support means everything. The transformation of Denise Williams did not happen overnight, and it did not happen easily. Every pound lost represented a battle won against the voice in her head that told her she wasn't worth saving, against the habits that had become her only comfort, against a body that had spent years building walls of protection around a wounded heart. January 2016 marked the beginning of what Denise would later call her year of physical change, though the physical was never really separate from the emotional. She weighed 420 pounds when the year began, still massive by any standard, but already transformed from the 518-pound woman who had collapsed on her bathroom floor 9 months earlier. James Carter had shown her what was possible. Now it was time to find out how far she could go. She committed to training 6 days a week, arriving at the gym before dawn, while the rest of Charlotte was still sleeping. Her diet transformed completely. Meal prep on Sundays, whole foods throughout the week, no processed sugar, no fast food, no eating to numb the pain. She saw a nutritionist monthly who helped her understand that food was fuel rather than punishment or reward. She journaled daily, an assignment from the therapist James had encouraged her to see, a woman named Dr. Patricia Howard, who specialized in trauma and disordered eating. In those journal entries, Denise confronted truths she had buried for years, that she had been abused, that she had been gaslit into believing she deserved it, that the weight she carried was not a personal failure but a physical manifestation of pain that had nowhere else to go. Writing these truths down didn't make them hurt less, but it did make them visible, manageable, something she could look at from a distance rather than something that lived inside her bones. The milestones came slowly at first, then faster. In March 2016, she dropped below 400 pounds for the first time in years, a number that made her weep with a combination of grief and joy. In June, she climbed a flight of stairs without stopping, something she hadn't been able to do since before her marriage ended. In September, she ran her first continuous mile. Actually ran it, her feet hitting the pavement one after another for 12 minutes and 43 seconds, while James jogged beside her shouting encouragement. She cried at the finish line, not because she was tired, but because she had just done something Darren Mitchell had told her 1,000 times she would never do. By December 2016, she weighed 320 pounds, her wedding weight, the weight she had been when she still believed in fairy tales. She had lost nearly 200 pounds in less than 2 years. But the physical transformation was only part of the story. 2017 became what Denise called her year of emotional change, a season of rebuilding the parts of herself that couldn't be measured on a scale. She weighed 280 pounds by January, then 250 by spring, then 220 by summer. The excess skin that remained after such dramatic weight loss became its own challenge. She began saving for skin removal surgery, setting aside money from her medical billing job each month toward a goal that felt increasingly achievable. But more importantly, she began reclaiming the parts of her identity that Darren had stripped away. She started speaking at her church about her journey, sharing her story with other women who were struggling, discovering that vulnerability created connection rather than shame. She launched a support group for women recovering from abusive relationships, meeting weekly in the church basement, providing a safe space for conversations that too many people were afraid to have. In June 2017, Denise underwent her first skin removal surgery, a lower body lift that removed 10 pounds of excess skin and left her feeling more like herself than she had in over a decade. The recovery was painful, weeks of limited mobility and careful wound care, but she had become someone who knew how to endure pain in service of something better. In September, she had a second surgery, arm lift and back lift, removing more evidence of the body she had once used to hide from the world. By December 2017, Denise Williams weighed 195 pounds. She had lost 323 pounds total. She was lighter than she had been on her wedding day. She was 41 years old, and for the first time since she was 28, she felt like she had a future worth living. She returned to volunteering at the homeless shelter she had abandoned years earlier, recognizing faces of staff members who had wondered where she disappeared to, reconnecting with the community that had once given her purpose. She reached out to former mentees from her foster care program, young women who were now adults with children of their own, some of whom had given up on hearing from her again. One of them, a 25-year-old named Crystal who Denise had mentored through high school, told her something that rearranged her understanding of her own life. "You saved me," Crystal said, tears in her eyes. "When I was 16 and everyone else had given up on me, you showed up every week. I thought you forgot about me." Denise realized then that her transformation wasn't just for herself. It was for everyone she had abandoned when she abandoned herself. It was for the woman she was still becoming. For the first time in over a decade, Denise Williams was living rather than just surviving. She was healthy, purposeful, reconnected to the mission that had once defined her. But there was one part of her life she had written off entirely, convinced that some doors, once closed, could never be reopened. She had accepted that romantic love was not in her future. She had made peace with the idea that she would spend the rest of her life alone, grateful for her health and her family and her work, no longer believing that she deserved or could attract the kind of partnership she had once dreamed about. And then January 2018 arrived, and with it, a charity gala that would introduce her to a man who would teach her that love, real love, had nothing to do with what she weighed. The event was a fundraiser for foster youth, held at the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Charlotte, and Denise attended because the cause aligned with everything she had spent her career fighting for. She wore a blue dress she had picked out herself, the first formal dress she had purchased in years, the first time she had felt confident enough to attend an event where people would see her, really see her. She was nervous in ways she hadn't anticipated, unsure how to exist in social spaces as the person she had become, rather than the person she had been. Derek Simmons noticed her from across the room, not because of how she looked, but because of how she talked. She was speaking passionately to a group of attendees about the failures of the foster care system, about children who deserved better, about policy changes that could save lives. Her intelligence and conviction drew him closer, and by the time she paused to take a breath, he was standing beside her. Derek Simmons was 45 years old, a widower whose wife Margaret had died of breast cancer 3 years earlier, after a 2-year battle that had redefined his understanding of love, loss, and what mattered in life. He had been married to Margaret for 22 years, high school sweethearts who had built a life together, raised 2 children who were now adults, faced every challenge as partners. Losing her had broken him in ways he was still learning to understand. He spent 2 years grieving, focusing on his children, refusing to date despite the encouragement of friends and family who worried about him being alone. His therapist eventually convinced him to open his heart again, not because Margaret was replaceable, but because he had too much love left to give to spend the rest of his life closed off from connection. He wasn't looking for anyone when he walked into that gala. He wasn't expecting to meet someone who made him feel something he thought he'd never feel again. Their first conversation lasted 2 hours, covering everything from foster care reform to grief to the strange experience of rebuilding yourself after loss. Derek didn't ask about her weight loss journey. He didn't know there was one. He asked about her dreams, her work, her beliefs, her hopes for the future. He treated her like a complete person rather than a before and after photo, and that was more attractive to Denise than any compliment about her appearance could have been. When the gala ended, he asked for her number. She gave it, her heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. Their first date was coffee at a shop in South End, 2 hours of conversation that felt like 10 minutes. Their second date was a walk in Freedom Park, where Derek asked about her dreams and listened to her answers without interrupting, without correcting, without making her feel like her thoughts were less important than his own. The courtship moved slowly, deliberately, a stark contrast to the whirlwind that had defined her relationship with Darren. Derek never checked her phone. He never criticized her appearance. He never tried to control her schedule or isolate her from friends and family. When she told him about her past, the marriage, the abuse, the miscarriages, the years of believing she was worthless, he listened without interrupting, then took her hand and said something that made her cry. "That man was a fool," Derek said, "and I'm grateful for it. Because if he hadn't been such a fool, I wouldn't have the chance to know you now." She wanted to believe him. She was terrified to believe him. But with each passing week, each thoughtful gesture, each moment of kindness that asked nothing in return, she began to understand that love didn't have to hurt. In July 2018, after 6 months of dating, Derek proposed at Freedom Park, the same spot where they had taken their second walk together. There was no audience, no photographer, no performance. Just the two of them at sunset. Derek on one knee, asking if she would let him spend whatever years he had left, showing her what she deserved. She said yes. The engagement photos they took the following month showed a woman who had been through hell and emerged radiant, scarred in ways the camera couldn't capture, but healed in ways that showed in every smile. She posted those photos on social media, her first public photos in years, and the response overwhelmed her. Hundreds of comments, thousands of likes, messages from people she hadn't heard from in decades, telling her how proud they were, how inspired they were, how beautiful she looked. Those photos spread beyond her immediate circle, beyond her church community, beyond the people who had watched her transformation in real time. They reached someone she had almost managed to forget about entirely. They reached Darren Mitchell. 20 miles away, in a house in a gated community he had selected specifically for its prestige. Darren Mitchell was looking at his ex-wife's engagement photos on his phone, and something inside him was twisting into a shape even he didn't recognize. The woman in those photos bore no resemblance to the broken creature he had left behind in 2012. She was thin, confident, glowing with a happiness he had spent 7 years, convincing her she didn't deserve. She was wearing a blue dress that showed off a figure he had never seen during their marriage. She was holding hands with a man who looked at her with the kind of adoration Darren believed only he was capable of inspiring. And she was smiling. Not the performative smile she had worn when they were married, the one designed to convince the world everything was fine. But a real smile. A free smile. The smile of a woman who had escaped him and found something better on the other side. The photos should have meant nothing. They were from a woman he hadn't spoken to in over 6 years, a chapter of his life he had supposedly closed and moved beyond. But Darren Mitchell was not capable of moving beyond anything that challenged his self-image, and those photos challenged everything he believed about himself and his role in Denise's life. He had told himself a story for years, that he had done his best with a difficult woman, that her weight gain was her own failure, that leaving her was an act of self-preservation rather than abandonment. He had told himself that without him, she would continue to deteriorate, would probably die alone, would prove that everything he had said about her was true. Those photos demolished that narrative completely. If Denise could transform like this without him, if she could become beautiful, successful, happy without him, then what did that say about the 7 years he had spent telling her she was nothing? Darren's own life was not going as well as his social media suggested. His marriage to Victoria had followed the same pattern as his marriage to Denise. Love bombing followed by control, charm followed by criticism, adoration followed by contempt. Victoria had discovered by 2017 that the successful man she had married was actually a tyrant who monitored her spending, questioned her friendships, and criticized her parenting of their daughter, with the same cold precision he had once directed at Denise. By 2018, Victoria was sleeping in a separate bedroom, consulting a divorce attorney in secret, counting the days until she could safely leave. Darren sensed her withdrawal, but blamed her for it, convinced as always that any problem in his relationships was caused by the inadequacy of the women he chose rather than anything deficient in himself. And then he saw those photos of Denise, and his marriage problem suddenly seemed less important than the much larger problem of an ex-wife who had escaped him and thrived. The obsession began gradually, the way all dangerous things begin. Darren found himself checking Denise's social media multiple times a day, scrolling through her photos, reading comments from people celebrating her transformation. He created a fake account so he could follow her without her knowledge, without triggering any notification that might alert her to his attention. He screenshotted her posts, zoomed in on her photos, studied the man she was engaged to, with the careful attention of someone cataloging a rival. He discovered where she worked, a rehabilitation center on the east side of Charlotte, and one afternoon in September 2018, he drove past it, just to see, just to confirm that she was real, that this transformation had actually happened. He told himself it was curiosity. He told himself it meant nothing. He drove past again the next week, and the week after that. The first direct contact came on September 15th, 2018. A text message that appeared on Denise's phone like a ghost from a life she had fought desperately to escape. Saw your pictures. You look good. Glad you're doing well. She stared at those words for a long time, her heart racing, her hands trembling. She didn't respond. He texted again the next day. I heard you're engaged. Congrats. She blocked his number. The boundary should have been clear. Any reasonable person would have understood that blocked meant unwanted, that silence meant leave me alone. But Darren Mitchell was not a reasonable person. He was a man who had spent his entire adult life believing he was entitled to whatever he wanted. And what he wanted now was acknowledgement from the woman who had dared to become everything he told her she would never be. She blocked him, he thought, staring at his phone. After everything I did for her. She blocked me. The entitlement crystallized into rage, and the rage demanded action. He showed up at her gym, the one where James Carter trained her every morning at 6 a.m., and watched from his car in the parking lot across the street. He watched her walk in, healthy and strong. Watched James greet her with a handshake and a smile. He watched and he waited. And he told himself he just needed to understand how this had happened. How the woman he had broken had put herself back together without his permission. On September 30th, 2018, Darren Mitchell crossed a line from obsession into action, and the confrontation that followed would set in motion events that no one could undo. Denise was walking to her car after her shift at the rehabilitation center, keys in hand, mind on the wedding planning she and Derek had been doing over the weekend, when a voice behind her said her name. She turned, and there he was, the man she had spent 6 years trying to forget, standing in the parking lot of her workplace, as if he had every right to be there. Darren, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. What are you doing here? He smiled, that same charming smile that had fooled her 15 years ago, the smile that now made her stomach turn. I just wanted to talk. Why did you block me? Denise kept her voice calm, her body positioned near her car, her hand gripping her keys with the pointed end facing outward the way women are taught to do. We have nothing to talk about. Leave me alone. Darren's smile flickered, the mask slipping just enough to reveal what was underneath. I made you, he said, his voice low and intense. You'd still be 500 pounds if I hadn't left. You'd be dead. Everything you are now, you owe to me. Denise felt the old fear rising, the familiar instinct to apologize, to appease, to make the angry man in front of her feel better about himself. But she wasn't that woman anymore. I don't owe you anything, she said clearly. Don't contact me again. She got in her car, locked the doors, and drove away while he stood in the parking lot watching her leave. His hands were shaking. His jaw was clenched. Something in his eyes had gone flat and cold. Denise filed a police report the next day and applied for an emergency restraining order. She provided documentation of everything: the text messages, the parking lot confrontation, James Carter's observation of a car watching the gym from across the street. On October 3, 2018, a temporary restraining order was granted, requiring Darren to stay at least 500 feet away from Denise's home, workplace, and person. He was served at his office in front of colleagues who watched with curiosity as a process server handed him documents that shattered the image he had spent decades cultivating. The humiliation was complete, public, witnessed by the exact people whose respect he valued most. He went home that evening and told Victoria that his crazy ex-wife was making up lies to destroy his reputation. Victoria didn't believe him. She had seen too much by then to believe anything he said. She filed for divorce the following week. October 2018 became the month when everything Darren Mitchell had built collapsed around him, and instead of taking responsibility, he focused all of his rage on the woman he blamed for his destruction. His wife was leaving him. He was placed on administrative leave from work pending an investigation into the restraining order and what it might suggest about his character. His perfect life, the wife, the daughter, the title, the house in the gated community, was crumbling, and in his mind, there was only one person responsible. Not himself. Never himself. Denise. The woman who had gotten fat and ruined their marriage. The woman who had blocked his number instead of thanking him for setting her free. The woman who was now engaged to another man, living the life that should have been his to give or withhold as he saw fit. The internet searches began on October 10, 2018. Darren sat in his empty house. Victoria had moved out with their daughter and typed words into a search engine that would later become evidence at his trial. How to hurt someone permanently. How to disfigure someone. Acid attack effects. How to destroy someone's face permanently. He read articles about acid attacks in other countries, studied the damage that industrial chemicals could cause to human tissue, researched what kind of substances were available for purchase in the United States. He cleared his browser history afterward, believing himself clever enough to cover his tracks. He had no idea that digital forensics would recover everything, that every keystroke was being recorded somewhere, that his attempts at secrecy were as transparent as everything else about him. On October 12, 2018, Darren Mitchell walked into a hardware store and purchased a gallon of industrial-strength sulfuric acid, paying cash and telling the clerk he was dealing with a stubborn drain blockage. He also bought rubber gloves, a dark hoodie, and a travel mug with a lid that sealed tightly. He drove home and placed these items in his garage, then drove past Denise's house 3 times that evening, noting her schedule, memorizing the layout, observing that she parked on the street and walked to her front door without checking her surroundings. He wrote in his journal that night, entries that would be recovered and read aloud at trial, words that revealed the depth of his entitlement and the completeness of his delusion. She has no right to be happy, not after what she did to me. If she thinks she can just move on, just pretend I don't exist, she's wrong. I don't want to kill her. I want her to remember. Every time she looks in the mirror, I want her to remember. October 17, 2018 began like any other Wednesday morning in the quiet residential neighborhood where Denise Williams had rebuilt her life. The sun rose at 7:21 a.m. over Charlotte, casting long shadows across tree-lined streets where neighbors walked dogs and garbage trucks made their rounds. Denise woke at 6, showered, dressed in the scrubs she wore to work at the rehabilitation center, and spent a few quiet moments scrolling through Pinterest boards filled with wedding inspiration. She was 42 years old. She was engaged to a man who loved her. She was healthy, happy, free. She had no way of knowing that 12 seconds would separate the woman she was from, the woman she would be forced to become. At 7:41 a.m., Denise opened her front door and stepped onto the porch, iced coffee in her left hand, phone in her right. Derek was still inside, finishing getting ready for his own workday, and she called over her shoulder as she left. "I'll see you tonight, babe." The morning air was crisp with October coolness, the kind of weather that makes you grateful to be alive. She noticed a man approaching from her left, walking along the sidewalk toward her front door. He was wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up, head slightly bowed, the kind of posture that could belong to anyone. A delivery person, a neighbor she hadn't met, someone looking for an address. She started to smile, her default expression these days, the automatic friendliness of a woman who had rediscovered her faith in people. "Can I help you with something?" she asked. The man looked up. The moment their eyes met, recognition flooded through Denise like ice water. She knew that face. She had spent 7 years studying that face for signs of his mood, learning to read its expression so she could anticipate his anger, his disappointment, his cruelty. "Darren," she said, confusion overriding fear for just a moment. "What are you—" She didn't finish the sentence. She would never remember the end of that sentence. What she would remember, what she would describe in court, and in interviews, and in the nightmares that would follow her for years, was the moment he lifted the travel mug, the moment she saw liquid inside it, the moment she understood too late what was about to happen. The acid hit her face at 7:47 a.m. Sulfuric acid, industrial strength, the kind used to dissolve the most stubborn organic matter, made contact with human skin that had never been designed to withstand such an assault. Denise would describe the sensation as fire, not metaphorical fire, not the burning of embarrassment or shame, but actual fire, as if her face were being consumed by flames from the inside out. She screamed, dropped her coffee and her phone, and clawed at her face instinctively, which was the worst thing she could have done. The motion spread the acid further, pushed it into areas it might not have reached, extended the damage beyond what even Darren had intended. She fell to her knees on the porch, still screaming, her hands burning now too, her vision disappearing behind a wall of pain so complete that it blocked out everything else in the world. Derek heard the scream from inside the house and came running. He threw open the front door and found Denise on the ground, her face unrecognizable, skin bubbling and dissolving before his eyes. He saw a man running away, a dark figure disappearing around the corner of the street, and for a split second he faced a choice that would define everything that followed. Chase the attacker, or help the woman he loved. He chose Denise. He always chose Denise. He dropped to his knees beside her, trying to help without knowing how, calling 911 with hands that shook so badly he could barely hold the phone. "My fiancé's been attacked," he said, his voice breaking. "Someone threw something on her face. It's burning. It's burning her. Please, you have to help." A retired nurse named Carol, who lived 3 doors down, heard the screaming and came running with a garden hose. She had enough medical training to know that water was the only thing that could help, that diluting the acid was more important than anything else in those first critical minutes. She flooded Denise's face with cold water from the hose, speaking calmly even as her hands trembled, telling Denise to hold on, help was coming, she was going to be okay. The lie was necessary. Looking at what the acid had done, Carol wasn't sure anyone could be okay after that. Neighbors emerged from their houses, some screaming, some crying, some standing frozen in the horror of witnessing something their quiet street had never prepared them for. By the time paramedics arrived at 7:55 a.m., Denise was conscious but barely responsive, her face a landscape of destruction that would require years to partially repair. She arrived at Carolina's Medical Center at 8:12 a.m. and was rushed into emergency treatment. Doctors flooded her wounds with saline, administered IV pain medication strong enough to render her semi-conscious, and began the painstaking process of assessing damage that seemed to grow worse with every passing minute. Third-degree burns covered 15% of her face. Her left eyelid was severely damaged. Her vision in that eye would never fully recover. The first surgery lasted 14 hours, and it was only the beginning. Derek sat in the waiting room the entire time, refusing to leave, refusing to eat, refusing to do anything except wait for news about the woman he had planned to marry in 3 months. Gloria and Robert Williams arrived by 9 a.m., Gloria collapsing when a nurse described the extent of their daughter's injuries. The woman who had survived so much, the abuse, the miscarriages, the 518 pounds, the collapse on the bathroom floor, was now fighting for her life again. And the man who had done this to her was still free. While doctors worked to save Denise Williams's face, detectives were already piecing together what had happened and who was responsible. The attack bore all the hallmarks of something personal. No robbery, no forced entry, a victim targeted specifically and attacked in broad daylight in front of her own home. When investigators questioned Derek at the hospital, asking if Denise had any enemies, any stalkers, anyone who might want to hurt her, he gave them one name without hesitation: Darren Mitchell, her ex-husband, the man she had filed a restraining order against just 2 weeks earlier. By 8:30 a.m., while Denise was still in surgery, detectives were heading to Darren's address with questions that would quickly turn into accusations. They found him at home, his car in the driveway with the engine still warm from recent use. He answered the door calmly, his demeanor that of a man who had nothing to hide and nothing to fear. Detective Raymond Webb introduced himself and asked Darren if he could account for his whereabouts that morning between 7 and 8 a.m. "I was here," Darren said smoothly. Sleeping. It's been a difficult few weeks. The lie came easily. The way lies had always come easily to Darren Mitchell, but it would unravel faster than any lie he had ever told. Detective Webb asked if Darren knew a woman named Denise Williams. My ex-wife, Darren said, allowing concern to shade his voice. Why? Did something happen to her? Webb didn't answer directly. He simply asked if Darren would be willing to come to the station voluntarily to answer a few questions. Darren agreed, confident that his charm could carry him through anything. The interview room at Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department was small, deliberately so, designed to make suspects feel the walls closing in. Darren sat across from Detective Webb and his partner, Detective Angela Foster, projecting an image of cooperative concern that he believed was utterly convincing. He expressed shock when told about the attack, said he hoped Denise would be okay, offered that, despite their difficult history, he had never wished her harm. The detectives let him talk, watching his body language, noting the places where his story felt rehearsed rather than genuine. Then Detective Foster asked a question that would become the turning point of the entire investigation. When did you last have contact with Denise Williams? Darren paused almost imperceptibly. Months ago. We don't communicate. There's a restraining order. Detective Webb nodded. What can you tell us about the attack this morning? Darren leaned forward with practiced sincerity. It's terrible. Acid? To her face? I can't imagine who would do something like that. The room went silent. Detective Foster looked at Detective Webb. Detective Webb looked at Darren Mitchell. Then Webb spoke, his voice quiet but devastating. I didn't say anything about acid, Mr. Mitchell. Darren's face flickered. Just for a moment, just a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. He recovered quickly. I assumed, from what I heard, from the news. But the damage was done. There hasn't been any news release yet, Detective Webb said. No press conference, no media coverage. So I'm going to ask you again. How did you know it was acid? Darren's mouth opened and closed. For the first time in his life, he had no words. The man who had always been able to talk his way out of everything was finally trapped by his own tongue. The search warrant was executed within hours. In Darren's car, investigators found a faint chemical smell and a receipt from a hardware store dated October 12th. In his garage, they found an empty gallon container that had once held industrial-strength sulfuric acid. In his trash can, they found rubber gloves with acid burns on the fingertips. In his closet, they found a dark hoodie with chemical damage to the sleeve. On his computer, the digital forensics team recovered search history he thought he had deleted. How to disfigure someone permanently. Acid attack survival rates. Where to buy sulfuric acid. Searches conducted between October 10th and October 15th, 2018. His phone's GPS data showed him near Denise's house 3 times on the morning of the attack, at 4:17 a.m., at 6:03 a.m., and at 7:40 a.m., 1 minute before she stepped outside her front door. The second interview was different. Darren was now under arrest, handcuffed to the table. Represented by a public defender he had to accept because Victoria had frozen their joint accounts. His attorney advised him to remain silent, to say nothing, to let the legal process play out. But Darren Mitchell could not remain silent. He had spent his entire life believing that his words were his greatest weapon, that he could convince anyone of anything if given the chance to speak. She destroyed my life, he told the detectives, ignoring his lawyers' objections. She took everything from me. Detective Foster asked him to explain. She blocked me. After everything I did for her, I made her who she is. I made her. His attorney interrupted. Don't say anything else. But Darren couldn't stop. I just wanted her to remember me, he said. Every time she looks in the mirror, I wanted her to remember. The confession was complete. His entitlement had been his motive. His ego had been his undoing. The trial of Darren Anthony Mitchell began on March 11, 2019, in Mecklenburg County Superior Court, and for 3 weeks the citizens of Charlotte would hear testimony that revealed the full scope of one man's cruelty and one woman's survival. Darren had entered a plea of not guilty, his defense team arguing that he had been suffering from a mental breakdown caused by his impending divorce from Victoria, that he was not in his right mind when he committed the attack, that the man who threw acid on his ex-wife's face was not the real Darren Mitchell, but some temporary aberration. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Coleman, had a simpler argument. This was premeditated, planned, deliberate, and deserving of the maximum sentence the law allowed. Denise Williams attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row of the gallery with Derek on one side and her parents on the other. Her face was scarred, her left eye visibly damaged, her appearance permanently altered by what had happened 6 months earlier. She wore no makeup, made no attempt to hide or minimize what Darren had done. She wanted the jury to see her. She wanted them to understand what he had taken. Darren refused to look at her throughout the proceedings, keeping his eyes fixed on the defense table, on the judge, on anywhere except the woman whose face he had destroyed. The cowardice was visible to everyone in that courtroom. A man who could pour acid on a woman but couldn't bear to see the results. The prosecution called Detective Webb first, walking the jury through the investigation, the slip during the first interview, the evidence recovered from Darren's home and computer. The search history was displayed on a large screen for the jury to read. How to disfigure someone permanently, in stark black letters that made several jurors visibly recoil. Detective Webb testified that in his 23 years of law enforcement, he had rarely seen such clear evidence of premeditation. This wasn't a crime of passion, he told the jury. This was a crime of planning. Mr. Mitchell spent days researching how to cause maximum damage, purchased the materials he needed, surveilled his victim, and executed his attack with precision. He knew exactly what he was doing. Dr. Rebecca Morrison, the burn specialist who had overseen Denise's treatment, testified next. Her testimony was clinical, but devastating. She described third-degree burns covering 15% of Denise's face, permanent scarring that no amount of surgery could fully repair, vision loss of approximately 60% in the left eye that would never improve. She explained that Denise had already undergone 12 surgeries and would require at least 35 more over the coming years. She described chronic pain, nerve damage, the psychological trauma that accompanies disfigurement. When photos of Denise's injuries were displayed, photos taken in the emergency room hours after the attack, 2 jurors began crying. One asked to be excused to compose herself. The defense objected to the photos as prejudicial. The judge overruled the objection. The jury needed to see what Darren Mitchell had done. When Denise took the stand, the courtroom fell completely silent. She walked to the witness box with her head held high, her scarred face visible to everyone, her voice steady when she took the oath. The prosecutor asked her to describe the attack, and she did. The man approaching, the moment of recognition, the acid hitting her face, the feeling of her skin dissolving. She described the 7 years of marriage, the abuse, the miscarriages, the ways Darren had convinced her she was worthless. She described her transformation, her engagement to Derek, her belief that she had finally escaped. Then the prosecutor asked if she had anything she wanted to say to Darren directly. Denise turned in the witness chair and looked at her ex-husband for the first time since the trial began. "You told me for 7 years that I was worthless," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I finally stopped believing you. I became everything you said I'd never be. And you couldn't stand it. You wanted me to remember you every time I looked in the mirror. Congratulations, I will. But not the way you wanted. I'll remember that I survived you. Twice." The jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all counts. Aggravated assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm, assault with a caustic chemical, stalking, and violation of a protective order. Darren showed no emotion when the verdict was read. He simply stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, his eyes empty. At the sentencing hearing in April 2019, Judge William Henderson addressed Darren directly before pronouncing judgment. "Mr. Mitchell, you committed one of the most cowardly, cruel acts this court has ever seen. You punished a woman for healing, for moving on, for finding happiness. You believed her transformation was a betrayal of you. It wasn't. It was her salvation. and you tried to destroy it. The sentence: 35 years in state prison, no possibility of parole for 25 years. Darren Mitchell was led away in handcuffs. He would be in his 70s before he could petition for release. He still had not apologized. He never would. 35 years. That was the sentence handed down to Darren Mitchell, the number that would define his future, just as his crime had defined Denise's. But while Darren was led away to a prison cell where he would spend the next quarter century, Denise Williams faced a different kind of sentence. A lifetime of surgeries, of pain management, of looking in mirrors that reflected back a face she was still learning to recognize as her own. The woman who had already transformed herself once now faced the task of transforming again, and this time the journey would be even harder, because this time the damage had been inflicted not by neglect or despair, but by deliberate cruelty, by someone who had chosen to destroy her because he could not accept her freedom. The surgeries continued throughout 2019, 2020, and beyond. 47 in total by the time she stopped counting, each one a small step toward reconstruction, each one a reminder of what had been taken. Skin grafts harvested from her thighs and back, scar revision procedures to minimize the tightness that pulled at her features, eyelid surgery to restore partial function. The pain was constant, managed but never eliminated, a companion she learned to live with rather than something she expected to ever fully escape. Through it all, Derek stayed. He held her hand after every surgery. He changed her bandages when nurses weren't available. He slept in chairs beside hospital beds and drove her to appointments, and never once suggested that what had happened to her had changed how he felt about her. A reporter asked him once during the trial why he stayed with a woman whose face had been destroyed. Derek looked at the reporter like he was speaking a foreign language. "She didn't survive this because she's lucky," Derek said. "She survived it because she's the strongest woman I've ever known, and I'm honored to stand beside her." They married on December 14, 2019, in a small ceremony at the church where Denise had grown up, the same church where her parents had married 45 years earlier. 50 guests witnessed their vows: family, close friends, James Carter and his wife, Dr. Patricia Howard, who had helped Denise rebuild her mind even as surgeons worked to rebuild her face. Denise walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her face scarred, her smile radiant, her dress a simple ivory that she had chosen because it made her feel beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with perfection. Her vows spoke to everything she had learned in the years since she met a man who promised to love her and delivered only pain. "I've been broken before," she told Derek, her voice steady, her eyes wet. "I've been rebuilt before, and I'll keep rebuilding as many times as it takes. With you by my side, I know I can survive anything." In 2020, Denise began speaking publicly about domestic violence, turning her story into a tool for education and advocacy. She testified before the North Carolina General Assembly about the inadequacy of stalking laws, about how restraining orders are paper shields against determined abusers, about how the legal system fails survivors until it's too late. Her testimony helped pass legislation strengthening protections for domestic violence victims, requiring law enforcement to take stalking reports more seriously, increasing penalties for violations of protective orders. She started a foundation called Rise Again, providing legal assistance, counseling, and support services to women trying to escape abusive relationships. The organization helped over 200 survivors in its first 3 years, connecting them with resources Denise wished someone had connected her with decades earlier. She appeared on national news programs, her scarred face visible to millions of viewers who had never heard her story, her message clear and unwavering. "Darren wanted me to hide," she told one interviewer. "He wanted me to disappear, to be ashamed, to let what he did define the rest of my life. I refuse. I spent 7 years hiding from him, apologizing to him, believing the lies he told me about myself. I will not spend another second letting him control my story." Her father, Robert, passed away in 2021, living long enough to see his daughter not just survive, but transform her suffering into service. At his funeral, Denise delivered the eulogy, speaking about the lessons her father had taught her. "Daddy used to say that life will knock you down 100 times. The question isn't whether you'll fall. Everybody falls. The question is whether you'll get back up. I've gotten back up more times than I can count now, and I'll keep getting back up. For him, for myself, for every woman who needs to know that it's possible. This story was never about weight loss. It was never about the transformation from 518 pounds to 195 pounds, about the surgeries or the training sessions, or the before and after photos that spread across social media. Those details matter because they set the stage, because they establish what Denise Williams accomplished and what Darren Mitchell destroyed, but they are not the heart of what happened here. The heart of this story is about ownership, about what happens when someone believes your pain belongs to them, when they convince themselves that your healing is a betrayal of their authority, when they decide that if they cannot possess you, no one else should be allowed to love you either. Darren Mitchell was not a man who loved Denise Williams. He was a man who collected her, the way he had collected women before her, the way certain kinds of people collect beautiful things, and then destroy them when they no longer serve their purpose. He told himself a story about their marriage that made him the hero and her the failure. A story about a dedicated husband burdened by a wife who let herself go. A story that erased the abuse, the miscarriages, the systematic destruction of her self-worth that he had engineered over 7 years. When she transformed without him, when she proved that everything he had said about her was a lie, when she found happiness with another man who loved her in ways Darren was incapable of, his story collapsed. And rather than face the truth about himself, he chose to destroy the woman who had exposed his lies by thriving in his absence. What happens when your evolution threatens the very person who once vowed to love you? This question echoes through Denise Williams' story and through the stories of millions of women who have experienced some version of what she experienced. Not all abusers pour acid on their victims' faces. Most never escalate to physical violence at all. But the pattern is recognizable. The love bombing that captures attention, the isolation that eliminates support systems, the criticism that dismantles self-worth, the control that masquerades as care. These patterns exist on a spectrum, and Darren Mitchell represents an extreme end of that spectrum, but the foundation is always the same. Someone who believes they have the right to own another person. Someone who interprets their partner's independence as betrayal. Someone who cannot tolerate being left because they never truly learned how to love. The statistics tell a story that should haunt everyone who hears it. 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence in her lifetime. Stalking precedes 76% of intimate partner murders. Acid attacks are rising globally, and the vast majority of perpetrators are current or former intimate partners who cannot accept that the relationship has ended. Restraining orders are paper. They do not stop determined abusers. They simply document the escalation until something terrible happens. Denise Williams did everything right. She left. She rebuilt. She reported the stalking. She got a restraining order. She told people what was happening. And still, on an October morning in 2018, a man who believed her happiness was a crime against him poured acid on her face because the legal system could not stop him in time. But this story is also about something else, something the darkness cannot erase no matter how hard it tries. It is about resilience, about the human capacity to survive unsurvivable things and find meaning on the other side. It is about the people who show up when everything falls apart. James Carter, who believed in Denise before she could believe in herself. Derek Simmons, who loved her, not despite her scars, but as part of everything that made her who she was. Gloria and Robert Williams, who spent their retirement savings to save their daughter's life, and would do it again without hesitation. It is about Denise herself, who has now survived Darren Mitchell twice. First the marriage, then the attack, and who has chosen to use her survival as a weapon against the silence that allows abuse to continue unchallenged. Denise Williams continues her advocacy work today. Her foundation has helped hundreds of women escape situations that might have ended the way hers almost did. She speaks at conferences, to lawmakers, to anyone who will listen. Her scarred face a testament to what she survived, and her voice a promise that survival is possible even when it seems impossible. Darren Mitchell sits in a cell at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. his appeals denied, his freedom gone for at least another 2 decades. He has never apologized. He has never expressed remorse. He still believes, according to those who have spoken with him, that he is the victim of this story. Some people never learn. Some people can't. But Denise learned something that Darren will never understand. That freedom isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you take, something you fight for, something you rebuild every single day until it becomes unshakable. Thanks for watching this story all the way to the end. If it moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you of someone who needs to hear it, please like this video, share it with the people you love, and subscribe to this channel for more stories like this one. Every share, every like, every subscription helps us reach someone who might be trapped in a situation like Denise's. Someone who needs to know that transformation is possible and that survival is worth fighting for. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.